Yeah. So I made the relation with the lost sheep because it's in that parable. Because in that same discourse of sin and church discipline, Jesus talks about the parable of the lost sheep, of how he leaves the 99 and goes after the one. But then it's immediately followed by instructions to the church how to go after the wayward disciple, how to deal with them. So I believe how Jesus saves the one by leaving the 99 is through the activity of church discipline by the church. That is how we are the instruments that go out of our way to bring a person back through spiritual discipline. Yeah.
And I think another part of that was when you started the sermon, you kind of started off pointing at the authority that a church has over you as you go into membership, and you kind of you kept increasing the stakes. This is how much authority, this is how much authority, and to the point where it even ties up to your sanctification and how they declare you as a believer. So one of the questions would be that, like, to what degree is this authority exercised, or to what degree does this authority go to? That's something.
Yeah, I know a bunch of you guys had your hands on your head when I said we've probably disciplined more people than we have members in the church. Which is strange, no? We are a church that's very small. How is it that has happened? If we start making light of sin, it's going to creep. Which is, I think, the apology I made in a sermon 2 or 3 weeks ago, which is the only reason we get passive in fighting sin together is because we are becoming passive in fighting sin in our own lives. If we are serious about fighting sin in our own lives, we will be just as serious about fighting sin in the life of the church. So I think a church has to be very serious about fighting sin, because Jesus died to kill it. Jesus saved us by killing it in our flesh, and we continue to live our lives in being sanctified, which is the process of killing sin. So if anything, we have to be getting better at killing sin, identifying sin, and serious about sin. Any church that's serious about sin suffers any church that's serious about sin suffers this one problem of becoming legalistic, which is it all becomes which you can't if you are serious about the gospel. So I like putting it this way. We have a wrong notion of being balanced, biblically balanced, when we think it's 50-50. Because we see Paul talking about grace and law. And when he talks about grace, and if you've read the book of Romans, you'll feel this. When he starts talking about grace, it almost feels like the law is totally unnecessary. And then he starts talking about the law and you wonder where grace went. Right? And if we say that the biblical balance is 50-50, where we have a 50% keeping of law and a 50% dependence on grace, that's lesser. That would be the lukewarm that Jesus spews out of his mouth. Paul is entirely on the one hand about the law and entirely on the other hand about grace, and he's saying it's entirely law, entirely grace, in such a way that there is a complete cohesive unity between the two. So we are saved by grace alone, faith alone, in Jesus Christ alone. We know that, not by our works, but we are all about works. So if you love me, you will obey me. So we want to be aiming at both ends at the same time. The legalist is tipping one way at the cost of the other, and the liberal is tipping the other way at the cost of the other. And we shouldn't be drawing balance by becoming less of them and less of them. We should be as serious about grace as we would be about law. Same thing, there is neither male nor female in Christ, meaning we are all equal, we are all under Christ, equally worthy, equal worth, having equal worth and value and dignity and all of that. but yet a man is masculine and a woman is feminine. A man's roles have been distinctly identified from a woman's role distinctly identified. So one doesn't compromise the other. It becomes beautiful together. Talking about symbolisms, you look at the person of Jesus Christ, you have the nature of God and the nature of man. He is not half God, half man. He is truly God, entirely God, and truly man, entirely man. And just as that mystery is confounding, so are these mysteries. So in the life of the believer is happening this love for Jesus, a total dependence on grace, and a very deep seriousness about lawfulness. And it's not either or. And so that's the kind of seriousness we must have when we pursue, as a church, when we pursue these things. So as a church, we don't want to be legalistic. So we don't want to shy away from fighting sin, being serious about sin, exercising spiritual discipline, and we don't want to be any less in extending grace and loving and merciful. And because we're sinners, we're going to make mistakes. But because we're going to make mistakes, we're not going to say we're going to reduce down on this and reduce down on that. We want to be looking at every circumstance. And going back, I don't think a lot of these questions have a formulated answer. It requires wisdom, it requires biblical knowledge, it requires reasoning, it requires discussion, it requires counseling, it requires debate, and then you make the wisest decision you feel led to make individually, as a family, or as a church.
Yeah. So I think since we brought up the point about the church publicly declaring you to be a believer or recognizing your faith, one question that kind of ties into this, which is what is the requirement for baptism when it comes to membership, or is that a necessity when it comes to taking membership?
The biblical model very simply says that those who were believed were baptized and added into the church. So when we look back at early church structure, foundations, how they usually did it, a lot of people who came to faith were baptized and added into the church. So those activities usually happened together. If we know a member, if we know a person who's interested, as far as Redemption Hill is concerned, we offer membership to people who hold both the views of baptism, which is infant baptism or adult baptism. And when we did that, we had a lot of friends and good elders tell us it's going to just bring a lot of confusion. Because how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to handle it? That's just logistically, there's a lot of confusion. And the reason we yet did it is because we didn't feel confusion was a reason not to do it. We just felt that's bad reasoning. It's a whole lot more trouble. Well, fine, we'll take the trouble and we'll do that because we believe that there are genuine believers who hold both views on baptism. So as John Piper said to his church, which is the greater sin? Is it compromising on the issue of baptism or withholding the Lord's table from a genuine believer for whom Jesus shed his blood? And we feel that the greater sin is withholding the table, which is why we offer membership to both. So when we look at membership, we try to weigh where does the person stand, how serious are they in their particular standing. As a church, we hold to the adult Baptist position. We are a Credo Baptist church. So we teach that, we encourage people to look at that. And so with every new person coming into membership, we discuss with them and we push back on the membership front. So if you must know, my wife believes in infant baptism. I believe in adult baptism, which is a strange combination for a marriage. Like, that should be a deal breaker for many people. It wasn't for us, but we were very clear that I would decide the course of action for our children, and she was more than willing to submit. And through the course of my marriage, I have been seriously challenged regarding the topic of baptism, where there was a certain point where I just didn't know, because there was so much convincing that was happening on the other side. Not because of her, but because of Doug Wilson. And that's still ongoing. But what we do is we take it very seriously for... if you're a person who believes in infant baptism and we see that you are clear on that, we actually provide resources on that subject to make sure you're thinking clearly about it. And if you're a person who believes in adult baptism, that's the only place where this question comes. Because you believe in adult baptism, but you've never been adult baptized. In which case, we would say it's not a clear conscience not to be adult baptized. It's a break of conscience, and the question becomes, why are you not adult baptized? And so we like to walk them through that and then have them be baptized and become a member of the church. And that's the same thing we would do with someone who comes from a non-Christian background, because they are required to be baptized biblically. And so we wouldn't add them into membership without the first order of discipline that the Bible gives, the first step that the Bible gives, which should be baptism. So be baptized and become a part of the church. One day I think we'll do a public discussion on adult and infant baptism. Where does Ashok stand?
We'll find out. But yeah, he's taking his time. But yeah, so you mentioned earlier about
just on the topic of baptism, just to add flavor to it, if Ethan at the age of 3 looks at the baptism pool and says, with this minimal verbal ability I want, I'd probably baptize him.
So just to clarify, I think he was also pushing on the point that we are holding fast to the confession of faith. It doesn't, and the confession of faith, even if it comes from a child, it's we are willing to take it.
The New Testament, when it comes to the subject of baptism, does not weigh the seriousness of the individual, the maturity of the individual, the validity of the individual before giving them baptism. Philip had no way of knowing whether the eunuch was genuine. He had to baptize him. They had no practical means, when Peter preached and 3,000 people were added into the church, of knowing whether those 3,000 people were making a genuine confession. The only thing required in the New Testament was verbal confession. I want to be baptized. I recognize Jesus as my Lord. I want to serve Him. Was good enough for the apostles. It's good enough for me. So if it comes from a child, I would do it. I would believe that it is God's grace that allows a child. Bible says from the mouth of babes come truth. The Bible says the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. And so when the most innocent of minds is able to see dad and mom believe in baptism, and uncle and auntie and church folk believe in baptism, and when that innocent mind sees all of that and says, I believe too, that's good enough for me.
So if you're already wondering how did those conversations go, this is where we ended up. We went from holding fast to, okay, it has to come from an adult believer having gone through the experience of life. We came from that point to saying, if it comes from genuine confession and will testified by the child's parents, okay, it's good to go, because that the Bible doesn't seem to be drawing that boundary around children and differentiating between the adult and the child. But on that point, I want to bring another point and drive to one more question that's been said here, which is that even as he said earlier about Doug Wilson, and he had that confusion on where he stands on baptism. One of the first things that he did when he had that confusion was come to the brothers of church and take counsel or take advice from the brothers. So so he never went, okay, I have this doubt and I'm going to go into my room, I'm going to pray, I'm going to figure it out. But hey, like Paul, I think in the Bible it says that you include more than one brother into the decision that you take, and that's one of the key aspects of church membership, which is that you are allowing that sort of a possibility to exist, where other believers are investing in your life, and even to the point where it goes into every decision that you take. You are allowing believers to come together and help you take a decision. So the question that is said here is, how is it different from probably taking advice from a friend, and what is the difference between taking counsel from the members of a church or from brothers and sisters at the church that you're plugged into? And
specific to elders, Peter says that I know in Hebrews I think we read that the elders will have to give an account. Peter says they are being charged with the care of your souls. So when Jesus returns, some people are going to be called up and asked to give an account. And I don't think that's just anybody. I think parents will be called up to give an account of how they raised their children, how they prayed for them, how they brought them up in the admonition of the Lord. I think elders will be held accountable. Every authority at every stage, every level will be called to give an account for their subjects. In that sense, I think everybody is called, because we are called to love one another, care for one another. There's a measure of that. But you don't have the kind of commitment that we see in the New Testament with just friends. Let me break this to you. I have had long-term, rich friendships with people I thought were believers who I today don't think they were. Okay? It will look rich, it will look friendly, it will look fascinating. Paul would go around everywhere with Demas and even mention him in his letter, to finally talking about how Demas deserted him. So even Paul couldn't tell. It's when a friend whom you know gives you advices, there's no confidence that they'll remain. We have no confidence that they'll remain. But we have greater confidence when it is within the context of the local church. When you see that kind of commitment within the church, that's a healthy place where you see relationships stay being built up long term. And you might actually have friends who've been with you through thick and thin for a long term, and that's just God's grace. God graces us with those kind of friendships. But within the church context, I think there is that accountability and seriousness, and God is pleased to use that as the normative means to equipping you. So having friends outside of the church is fine. It's God's glory, it's God's grace, it's God's mercy. But when it's detached entirely from any local church, being plugged into the local church, it doesn't serve you well. I think the question is like asking, why do I need a dad when I can listen to John Piper on YouTube? Or why do I need a dad if I like that I like my boss at the office, he's a believer, mature man, gives me good counsel. Why do I need a dad if I've got him? It doesn't make sense, right? Because there is a intimacy, covenanting, seriousness that God has ordained for the dad to exercise upon his son. Same thing happens within the life of the church. So within the church, you just don't have friends. You have peers, you have brothers, you have sisters, you have wives, you have children, you're dealing with families, you're dealing with elders, so it's an entire community that is being formed with all kinds of relationships, all kinds of problems, all kinds of struggles, and then you work it together as one. So you can only have that within the life of the local church. I think we're out of time. So we'll pray and close, but if you have more questions, stay back and we'll just have an interaction. But let me just close by saying this. Like I said in the sermon, there might be legitimate, genuine reasons why you are not able to become a member of a church because of issues and circumstances that surround. And my response to that is, make it your ever important, clear pursuit to strive to solve that problem primarily. Don't put it in the back burner. Don't say that, okay, I've got an exception. Like I said, exceptional circumstances are the grace of God to keep you so that as soon as possible you can go to normalcy. So your pursuit has to be for normalcy, not to get accustomed and comfortable to the exception. There is a certain grace the Lord will give you in that time period. But you have to make every effort to pursue for membership. You pursue that, every day you pray for it. You must think, as serious as you are, when was the last time you prayed about it? When was the last time you asked the Lord for an opening about it? When was the last time you discussed with the church about it? So pray, take a buddy from the church who will pray with you. Tell more people within the church to pray for you. What is there that the Lord will not answer if we kneel down and come in agreement and pray for that? So attack your exceptional circumstances. Pursue membership. And I believe God is gracious to open those doors. And God will work. But let not any of that dull down the seriousness of it. Dull down the importance of it. We want to pursue. We want to be committed. We want the church to confess that they believe that we are Christian. And we want our community to grow that way. So let's be very diligent and serious about that. You can close us out.
Yeah, I just want to add one last thing, which is that also be cautious in the sense that be cautious that the enemy will use healthy things in your life to cause it to be a friction to your decision to plug into a healthy church. Healthy things such as the authority that you as a son or daughter the authority that your parents has over you as a son or daughter, or the authority that a husband might have over the wife. It is always, obviously, as you said, healthy to take counsel, and also it is healthy to recognize the authority that you have over yourself as you take these decisions. But at the same time, as that, you have to press on. You have to press on and pray and make sure that as you obey the Lord and moving towards a church, even if someone who has authority over you is against it, you have to be patient and wait on the Lord and labor with not just that person, whoever it could be, but also at the same time be patient to obey the Lord in His word, and He will guide you in a manner that both parties are affected in the right way.
Yeah, you won't let me finish. Yeah. Let me put. I think it's very important. Let me put it this way, because I think a lot of people have asked me that question. Children asking about parents saying you cannot be plugged into the church, and my immediate question is, how old are you? Are you a minor or are you an adult? Are you someone who has become an adult? Where do you live? Are you self-sufficient? Are you dependent on them? All of those questions matter for me because the exercise of their authority matters. Which is the greater sin? Disobeying the parents and plugging into the church, or obeying your parents and not plugging into the church? Both are bad decisions. But which is more grave? A husband telling a wife, you cannot become a member of a healthy church. Okay? You're called to submit to your husbands as to the Lord, but you're called to plug into the church. What do? I feel that these are exceptional circumstances, right? I feel the seriousness has to be such that you are prayerful, you recognize the authority over you, and you take a wise decision about which of the two is the greater evil or the greater sin, because you're going to have to choose either of the two. It's a one or the other kind of a thing. And if you choose to remain under the authority, as we have encouraged many people to do, we've encouraged people not to become members because of the authority of the husband or the parents, and said labor with them, don't rush into membership, but fight for membership, pray and pursue it. And there are people who have come back and said, no, for us in our conscience it's very important to be a member of the church, that we're willing to fight for this, in which case we concede. But we give that encouragement nevertheless. But you want to keep pushing for it. You want to take every opportunity to talk. But at the same time, there are cases where, at least with youngsters, I think I have said that, well, given the circumstances, if you want to become a member of the church, the best thing for you to do is move out, stay on your own, Don't have to use your dad's money to take the bus and auto and come here. Be independent. Be an adult, because as an adult you are called to make your decisions. At that point, the exercise of authority of the parents is not an excuse. I think you have to learn to take your stand graciously, mercifully, lovingly, but firmly. So it really, again, it's not you don't have a formula answering these questions. But I think we should pray as a church when people express a desire to become a member of the church and yet have struggles. And so, we've labored through things like that. We'll continue to labor through things like that. My intention is to come and tell you two things. One is, don't let your exception make you comfortable. Push, fight, be serious, pray, seek help, and the Lord will work. And second, don't use the exceptions of others as an excuse for yourself. Well, if they can delay membership, so can I. Well, that's not excusable at all. So be very serious in your pursuit.